All righty, let's remove that destination. Let's save the changes. It looks like we were not connecting to everything that we had anticipated on, but that's okay. There's enough out there. It's a big wide world out there. And so welcome everybody. I'm Scott Stevens to another episode of Another Perspective. This one's going to be a little bit different, but I guess they're all a little bit different because, hey, it's me and I'm just a little bit different, and I'm glad to be not the same as everyone else. As we go through the trials and fires of life, it turns us into, or molds and shapes us into what we are, what we're to become. And that is the purpose in my eyes, been my experience. That's the purpose of life, is to be molded and shaped by the experiences that we draw to us, good or bad. And speaking for myself, we probably learn more by those challenging, those painful experiences than, say, by the good times, which you would just coast on by. And that's kind of been the lesson that I've been taught. Hey, guys, good to see you on there. All of you, hey, just say hi, drop on in there and just give us a little shout. And so we know you're there, so we can give a little shout out. So we're going to roll on through this, and I'm going to call this, the power of pain, or actually the power of fire and the alchemy of pain. How pain has molded us and shaped us. And those that have been my friends through life, I've learned have always had far more challenging childhoods than I have. And it's curious how we go through life and we project our experiences onto those we see around us. We anticipate that their life experiences are similar to ours, especially when you're 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, when those are very formative, very powerful years. And you assume that their home life is a lot like yours. And as I learned, that was not the case. Good to see you in there, Linda, from Northern Louisiana. Bless your hearts. Marco's good, but that Laura behind it, that's going to be kind of a bit of a beast. So hang on down there. Our thoughts and prayers are with you. So the alchemy of pain, and that ultimately is what this is all about, is the alchemy of pain and how we use that. And so fire, honestly, is for me kind of a scary topic. Why? Well, because from our first years of life, we've been admonished by our parents and other authority figures to stay away from fire. Don't get too close or it'll burn you. And that's the common refrain. And they spoke the truth. Getting burned hurts. And it'll often leave a scar too. And those scars don't have to be just something physical. But after the first or second time of being burned, that lesson is learned. Fire, or maybe it's just the pain of the burn, that fire then imparts a lesson learned. Fire has so many uses. It keeps us warm. It alchemizes or cooks our food, purifies water, cauterizes wounds, purifies metals, hardens poetry too, but pottery, and it lights the way. Fire is indispensable. So why has fire been demonized rather than respected for its transformative powers? Let's talk about fire in the outer world and also what it can do for us on the inside. Fire and alchemy go hand in hand. Now, I wouldn't have associated this together, but with my current partner, we'd started a company called Blue Water Alchemy, and we used a different kind of fire, the fire in the realms of pH, acidity, and alkalinity, to create a form of alchemy. So in a way, they go hand in hand. And I chose this picture for a reason, because you can see the sparks of fire, the sparks of change, the potential of pain going out from any fire in all directions, especially those directions driven by the wind, to transfer that experience of pain, of change, of alchemy out to points in the distance. And if you think about this metaphorically, do our words, do our feelings not do the same things as, say, the spark of a fire? A speaker in front of an audience, and we have those in the world today, with those words, with those sparks, can impart change to the audience that he or she stands in front of. So in many ways, words are sparks of change. They can bring the alchemy They can do it through love, or they could do it through pain. Either way, a truth is spoken because that reveals what the speaker would like to impart. So fire is a teacher. It is a purifier as a tool for alchemy. And we all eventually discover that we are in the alchemist's crucible of life. Let us explore the most basic of alchemy, the element of fire. Now, the Greeks broke this down, and I am certain that it was broken down long before that. The Greeks are not necessarily first on the scene, but because, and I feel a little sad that those libraries of Alexandria were burned by the Romans not long after they arrived there. Because if you could rewrite a nation's, a people's, a religion's history, then you can bring your history to those people and to tell them that those things that you believe in are true. And within a generation of two, their history, or let's just say your history, is now their history. And that has rewritten and taken away so many points of light, or so many bits of knowledge for that fire, for that light to have lit the way. So we would prove to, let's just say, the ancient Greek concept of the four basic elements, those being earth, water, air, and fire, are predate the Socrates, or the predates the times of Socrates, and persisted through the Middle Ages and then through the Renaissance, deeply influencing European thought and culture. Now, at least this Empedocles, why did I not? I could say this fine before I was on the air. Proved at least to his satisfaction that air was a separate substance by observing that a bucket inverted in water did not become filled with air, that they were separate, and a pocket of air remained trapped inside. Greek philosophers had debated which substance was the primordial element from which everything else was made. And this still, from what I'm aware of, trumps or keeps scientists a little bit curious today, because we are locked into a paradigm upon which, if you can't see it, if you can't measure it, then it does not exist. And Nikola Tesla was really big in stating that as soon as science lets go of studying the visible to studying the invisible, more progress would be made, quote unquote, in 10 years than in the previous 100 years. And someday that will happen. So Plato seemed to be the first to use the element in reference to air, fire, earth, and water. The ancient Greek word for element was to line up at the smallest division or syllable as the composting unit of the alphabet. It could be denoted later. So you've probably already read it. Fire is both hot and dry. Air is both hot and wet, like vapor. Water is both cold and wet. And then I want to go back one. We're going to hit this because I got to finish this concept. The water is cold and wet, then earth is both cold and dry. And then there's that other one, the ether, the one that likely that fifth element from which these others are formed. And that would satisfy, certainly Tesla's curiosity within the subject. So one reflects on the year 2020 thus far and asks, seriously, what else could happen? And my reply is simply, more alchemy. So we'll start kind of the beginning of the year, and this started just a little bit before the top of the year, and that was in the news, and that was Australia's fires. And the year began with several major fire events underway already on the Australian continent, and it wasn't until they got deeper into winter before those were ceased, and it was stopped by another element, that element of water. So the sheer scope of which these fires took place certainly challenged the imagination. So we had Black Saturday Hill fires, 450,000 hectares, 809,000 hectares, that 2018 California fires. That was just 2 years ago. That many acres burned. The Amazon fires, the beginning of last year, 890,000 acres. And I got to be honest with you, the fact that the Amazon fires consume that many acres was a little big for me, because I assumed that the Amazon was always wet. You look how green it is, and you're like, it's got to be raining there every day. Well, okay, at least every third day. But on reviewing of the satellite imagery, they go weeks and weeks without rain, and sometimes even without clouds, as they're deep in a subsidence atmosphere, which is the air's downward sinking, and you've got to have uplift for thunder showers or rains to happen. The other big fire was also last year with 2.7 million hectares was the Siberian fires in Western Russia. And those fires in many ways were unprecedented simply because of their latitude north. And they didn't burn as hot as some others, but because the fires don't burn there frequently, the loading of the forests was immense. And we'll look at some of those forests here in the United States that are similarly loaded with that kind of fuel that is ready to burn. And then, of course, the Australian fires that haven't ended but a few months ago at 10 million hectares. So obviously this chart denotes scale, but certainly is not to scale. All right. So the average number of fires, 44% of them begun by lightning. Humans, excluding industry, and this was kind of the big revelation for a lot of the Australian fires, is that they were arson. I mean, so many. And when they had those clusters without the weather to support it, human arson, and 8% remaining unknown, and then 7% by industry. And then an area burned, 74% by lightning. That's just because you're out remote. They don't have the resources to get there quickly. You've got to muster surveillance, recon to see what's going on out there. Then you've got to get the ground crews in place, run the lines, get the water transported there, or call up air support to get them into place. So lightning tends to burn very quickly, out of control, until they can get assets on site. 22% of area burned is kind of that unknown category. So that's kind of a 3-to-1 ratio. And then human, because there's humans on site. If one person starts a fire, there's usually another human person around that could say, hey, that's not right, and then call others into action again, and then get into suppression mode very quickly. And then area burned 1% by industry. And that makes more sense because if you've got industry and this icon denoting logging, we've got logging, we've got all kinds of other reasons why we would have industry out there, pipeline probably being another one. So back to the beginning of the year, and this was just a cutout of New South Wales, Queensland, and then down to Victoria in southeast Australia, where this particular cycle of fire, rain, and recovery is played out in Australia for millennia, certainly long before humans were around. But the majority of the country's forests are uniquely adapted to the fire, and some species absolutely required. Australia is, more than any other, a fire-based fire continent, writes an ecologist. But scientists have long warned that a warming climate could mean more severe fires and more often. And even if the climate is not warming and we're only warming by fractions of a degree, it would be the span of rainfall, the gap between rainfalls, that truly becomes the risk factor. If in the northern hemisphere your last spring rains happen Memorial weekend, the end of May, and then you don't get the summer monsoons like we do here in Colorado till the second, third week of July, then that's a gap where things can begin to dry up. Or if you don't get a monsoon at all, which has now happened for at least 2 consecutive summers in the Mountain West. The other thing is available fuels. So the new research published by the journal Nature's Climate Change found that a staggering 21% of Australia's forested areas burned in this last fire season. Nearly 1/5, or just more than 1/5 of the forest areas burned, a figure that authors say is globally unprecedented. And then that may indicate that more flammable futures projected to eventuate under climate change has arrived earlier than anticipated. So this cycle of fire, rain, and recovery has played out in Australia for millennia. The majority of the country's forests are uniquely adapted to fire because it happens so frequently. But Australia is more than any other a fire continent. So then the question is, how do we adjust? If we know it's a fire continent, if we know these things happen with an interval that is shorter than, say, a human lifespan, then are we wise in building where we build? Is it wise to build the kind of structures that we're building deeply embedded into the forest? Or are those capital costs, timber, tin, 2x4s, kind of predicate the kind of structures that we build? Because we tend to build on the cheap simply because we afford we can. But how often do we do this? Do we endure the kinds of burns, the kinds of alchemy that happens in forests as we take the wood and reduce it to ash and creating a pH kind of change in the soils? What kind of change are we willing to accept? What kind of risk is too great before we'll choose a different location of building. And then there's the risk to wildlife, and that probably for me and most of us around is the greater one, because we can get up, we can see it happening, we get advanced knowledge, but it's the wildlife that has to smell it, has to hear it, has to see it, or has to hear through their own communication lines, through other animals, through being keenly aware of their environment, of when to get out of the way, and is there a safe place to go. And that resides largely simply in their instincts of what to do, where to go, and how to maintain safety. This is kind of the other thing where you've got man nearby, because obviously we've got a pole here, and then you've got to do cleanup. You've got to feed them, or they have to survive in some way. So then they're ultimately looking for greens of some regard. So now that we've had Australia, now it's California and the turn of the Western United States to feel the burn. So throughout this country, and this was from this morning from the National Fire Interagency Fire Center up in Boise, that throughout the country, 93 large fires have burned so far, more than 1.8 million acres. Nearly 1.4 million of those have occurred in California. California currently has the most fires active with 28 large fires. Arizona and Oregon are tied for second with half that number, of 14. And so already this year, 40,500 plus fires with 5.0 are coming up on 5.1 million acres. And this was as of this morning. And what's curious is those airdrops, and you could see the red retardant right across the ridge crest, stopping the fire from advancing down the other side, because once it gets down into the gullies, then you're dealing with winds, and it becomes a lot more difficult for these pilots and these crews to navigate accurately and to put out the fire. So that is the prime opportunity, is at Ridgecrest to do that. Now, I shot these particular pictures back in July, actually it was mid-August of 2012, on a trip here from Colorado to Southern California. And this is Wolf Creek Pass. So I'm above 10,000 feet. And the pine deep beetle, because of the warmth through the western fires, through the western states, has been, there's no other word outside of catastrophic, devastating, landscape changing. All of these descriptors would be accurate, and maybe in the end run, not accurate enough to just to demonstrate how much dead wood is standing up there. And do we have that kind of an appetite for wood in the States or globally, or do we even have the infrastructure to come in and harvest this wood simply because there's so much? And it's led, that much wood is up there for because yes, the winters have not been as cold as they have been, and we're cresting beyond this point in this climate cycle, whereupon this is the result. And either we burn and we end up with a different kind of ponderosa, we end up with a different kind of evergreen growing in those locations. Maybe it reverts to pinyon. I don't know, but it's going to reach a climax at some point. Now, when I was growing up in the 70s, this was the PSA, the public service announcement, that remembered only you can prevent forest fires. You remember that deep voice, the bear speaking to you. And living in Idaho, Utah, and New Mexico, I was always in or near the forest. I was always within. You look outside, you could see the mountains, you could see the forest. That was just how we navigated, was by the mountains and the terrain. And so we're kind of now in a trap, where now, because of we've gone through so much fire prevention, we've gotten in so many ways so good at it, are these forests just so loaded with timber that now the fires, when they do go, are they too big? Are they too hot to handle? So then we have got this policy now where we have to pre-burn. We've got to have prescribed burns. We have to go through a burning experience. We've got to inflict pain so that we can prevent a larger pain from manifesting. And so we burn out lines. We pre-burn the low shrub to create a fire barrier. We go through an experience, so we'll learn not to follow through that path and have a greater painful experience ahead. And this all impacts the wildlife. And they are, in many ways, since we are the top of the food chain, we are the most evolved beings on the planet, that we think we know what's best. And we kind of operate from that process. So we go through a burn, The forest, it's either a light intensity burn where a lot of things can come back very quickly. It's a medium intensity burn where the bark is definitely scorched, but we haven't gotten to the core of the tree. So we can still have some aspect of the tree or the brush deal with some kind of photosynthesis to keep the organism alive. Or it's a severe burn where even the bulk, if not all of the biomass to the top of the soil, is burned out. And then you're relying on simply the root structure to come back and then send up new sprouts. All three happen, and often in the same fire. That happens all the time. Yeah, Karen, I remember Smokey the Bear too. And the 70s were good, weren't they? We also know that heat can help open up pine cones that assist other aspects of regeneration. But smoke has a part of that there are actual natural plant growth regulators that require smoke for them to be triggered. So in the innermost secrets of fire's role in the rebirth and renewal of forests and grasslands is being evaluated in research and has identified plant growth promoters and inhibitors in smoke. Both are true. In the latest discovery about smoke's secret life, an international team of scientists are reporting a discovery of a plant growth inhibitor in smoke. The study appears in the ACS's Journal of Natural Products, a monthly publication. But smoke plays an intriguing role in promoting the germination of seed and many species following a fire. The colleagues point out in the report that previously discovered chemical compounds in smoke from burning plants that promote seed generation. Such seeds which remain in the undercover of forests and meadow floors after the fires have been extinguished are responsible for surprisingly rapid regrowth and of fire devastated landscapes. Fascinating that smoke can even play a part of that. What it also does is it begins to clean out streams. You have literally a pH shock to these streams. The pH surges and then it comes back and you clean out the stream beds. And often once you get the rain, sometimes the monsoons and thunderstorms or a very heavy rain plus a snow melt, you'll end up gouging out and just cleaning out these streams. So it looks like death is occurring. And in many places, yes, death is occurring. But in the wake of that death is a fresh bed, a fresh seed bed that can then be nourished by the systems which are in place and without man's intervention work. They just tend to work. This one outside of Durango just last year, it was called the 416 fire. A vast majority of the burn areas burned at low to moderate intensity, and that allowed for visible forest regeneration during that first growing season after the fire. This other fire in New Jersey, which is a far, far wetter location, say the Rocky Mountains in the Mountain West. But part of the fire that burned in that New Jersey fire had burned just 2 years previous. And the fire service, so said the fire service, had already grown back. This comes as little surprise to the federal researchers up the road at the Salus Little Experiment Forest, who had been developing tools to remotely measure the amount of fuel or burnable materials in the forest and measuring plant growth after a fire by how much carbon dioxide is being absorbed. And if we look back just a few slides ago to those fires in Colorado, all of that standing timber, all of that wood is dead wood. It isn't dealing or participating in the life cycle, the process. We're in the decay cycle where that is fuel ready to be consumed by fire. Once the fire happens, the carbon dioxide is released to the atmosphere, then that CO2 then can be fuel for the next round of trees, of tree and tree growth. And what I find interesting is then once that forest is healthy again, then the insect life can happen, the bird life can repopulate, and then it can build those homes that will last now decades instead of wondering when is that spark on the wind going to come in and reignite this. And that way we can begin to re-sequester that CO2 that has been so maligned within the press. So let's look at fire. Let's kind of look at the pain of fire, but also the regenerative aspects of it on the other side. So we'll look at a slightly different look at the fire, the pains caused by it. And I had to use the term the life's heated situations. And that part of it is the alchemy of pain. So what is alchemy? In the grossest of terms that you can find out there, the study of alchemy was the ancient form of scientific study that, of course, is no longer practiced. Although it is no longer around, and that isn't true, alchemy can be considered the grandfather of other modern sciences. alchemy actually had a number of goals and purposes, but attempts at transforming lead into gold are the most remembered by far. That certainly is true. We'd like to take some base element. Maybe that base element is just standing dead wood in a forest and turn it into life. Fire would be the process by which that alchemy of the old dead base material forest would be turned into life once again. You apply fire and then you apply water, and the two work. So it's become my understanding that the highest, the greatest of all alchemies is that not of the base metal into gold, but that of the spirit. The alchemy of life that propels us from living life as an animal to that of a spiritual being. That is the highest form of alchemy, and all life has been solely geared to that end result, forever driving us towards that divine outcome. So it is our encountering of pain, of the fires of life, that finally promotes one to change. If life is easy, if life offers no challenges, then the mind will want to continue to do exactly what the mind is presently doing. There is no impetus to change. There's no reason to change because it's all good. And so we go back to the beginning of the show where we talk about 2020. Can 2020 provide us with any more alchemizing experiences? And I kind of have a feeling that it's just beginning. The pain felt from one of life's fires is the pain of not letting go when it is past time to let go. So if we're not willing to let go of those circumstances, those situations that are now beginning to bring discomfort, to beginning to bring pain into our lives, it's telling us to surrender to something new, to let go. And in many ways, the COVID and the coming financial instances, crises, are going to force additional change on us through the application of pain. So the one thing, the situation simply becomes too hot to hold on to any longer. And when it's too hot to hold on to, that stove that our parents admonished us not to touch, we have to let go of, and that frees us to move on. So the other part of it is the judgment that probably most of us were brought up to or within was that of, you don't do something like we tell you to do, then you're going to go to hell and burn there forever. And it's been my realization that God doesn't cast us into the fiery pits of hell for punishment, but just simply for the fires of purification, so that one can quickly make adjustments and return to that path homeward. We realize a mistake, we make an adjustment, we let go of that which was causing pain, and then you're free to move on to other journeys. So the slide as an ending is always a doorway to a new beginning, and that makes sense. But the truth is the greatest fire of all, the truth that purifies all that it touches. So as that fire hits us and we feel the pain, we let go because we then see the truth of the situation. We see the true situation around us, because after the pain and after the letting go, that we can then finally see everything once again. So that's kind of my little take on fire. I know we're not done with fire. There's no way that we're done with fire. You saw that deadwood standing in Colorado. These will eventually, one day, they'll either burn or they'll decay, one or the other. But the potential for fire will not be gone until the decay is done, until that wood has been turned into another element, until life has consumed that standing wood and transmuted it, has alchemized it into something usable. Right now, that wood is just potential, waiting to be utilized by someone who will take advantage of the situation. And there's so much dead wood in everywhere we look, dead wood waiting for the fire to consume it, to purify it, in the financial situation, in politics, in education. There is dead wood everywhere. And a fire, the man will show up, and then eventually that fire will have its way, and in its wake will be revealed a new beginning, and we'll be able to see the way forward after the fire and the smoke have cleared. All right, everybody, thanks for stopping in. We'll have a look at weather on, obviously tomorrow, see where Laura is headed. And Glenda, let's hope it's not to your backyard. All right. Thanks for stopping, everybody. And as always, hey, keep looking up.